Hi folks, welcome to this video on memory. This is to do with ASPE. What we're looking at here are the various memory boxes and how we take on board and ultimately store information, how we can make sense of it. What we're looking at here is a very, very basic memory diagram. And as you can see on this side here, we've got the sense organs. Let me just change the colour of that thing because it doesn't stand out too well, does it? What we're going to do with the sense organs, so things like your eyes, your ears, your skin detecting touch, and your proprioceptors detecting balance. And as you can see by the number of arrows going on here, they are bombarding information, or they are receiving lots of information, and bombarding our first memory storage box called our STSS. And that stands for our short-term sensory store, okay? Now, that's the first part of our memory that information goes into. But as you can see, there's lots of information, as I said, coming in from the sense organs into your short-term sensory store. So what can we say about our STSS? Well, there are several things we can say. It is a temporary storage facility. And when we say temporary, I mean it can only hold information for around about half up to 1 second. And it's that old thing of, I bet you've all done it before, where you've looked at your watch to see what time it is, and then looked back up again and then thought, I still don't know what time it is. It's because you've looked at it, you've not paid it enough attention, and therefore you haven't remembered, you haven't retained the information for long enough. So it only stores information for up to a second, but it does store a lot of information for that 1 second, okay? But the point is, what's the point of remembering lots of things if you can only remember it for a second? It does receive information from the sense organs, as we can see on this diagram. There's the sense organs feeding information into the short-term sensory store. But what it does, now here's the key thing, look at the number of arrows here, and look here, there's only one arrow, because there's something else that your short-term sensory store does. It also includes something you'll be familiar with if you've looked at information processing. It also includes your selective attention, that filtering mechanism, okay? So what it does is, all of that, what we're basically saying is, lots of information hits your short-term sensory store from your sense organs. Because it can only hold that information for up to a second, it uses your selective attention to go ignore, 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 ignore. Right, that's what I'm going to focus on, and I'm going to pass that through. Sometimes you'll be asked to identify where selective attention takes place in a memory diagram. Look for where the arrows are going from many to just one. That indicates that your selective attention is occurring somewhere in here. So your selective attention is always occurring inside your short-term sensory store. So what we've done is we've filtered out and we've sent one key piece of information through, and we're going to forward that through into our short-term memory. So what can we say about our short-term memory? So our short-term memory, this can hold up to 5 to 9 items at a time. Some people say 7 items plus or minus 2. Yeah, that's exactly the same as 5 to 9. And it can generally store information for about 20 to 30 seconds. Okay? Test yourself, write about 20 random, or get someone to write 20 random numbers down on a sheet of paper. Look at it for about 30, 40 seconds, turn away. Okay, give yourself 20 seconds and see how many you can recount in the right order. It'll be around about 5 to 9 of them. Okay, as long as you don't keep repeating it to yourself. Obviously, it receives information from our short-term sensory store, as indicated here. Now, a term that you hopefully are familiar with, motor programs. Okay, what is a motor program? I'm just going to underline it as soon as I've got my pen working. A motor program is basically a skill. It's a movement pattern. Every skill you perform is stored in your brain as a motor program. Okay? Now, the short-term memory doesn't store the motor program. We're going to come on to the one that does in a second. I'm sure you can guess what it is. What the short-term memory does is it requests motor programs from our long-term memory. So it's our long-term memory that stores the motor programs. But our short-term memory runs the motor programs. As you can see on this diagram, this is the only time where there's a two-way arrow. So the short-term memory, having received the key piece of information from the short-term sensory store, decides, right, I think we need to perform this skill. So it requests the correct motor program for the long-term memory. The long-term memory then sends the motor program back to the short-term memory, and what happens is our short-term memory runs the motor program. Okay? So finally, the long-term memory then, as we've just said, it's basically storage. That is what your long-term memory is. Think of it as a USB stick. Your long-term memory stores information, including all our motor programs. So like I said, you've got a motor program for walking, for kicking, for jumping, for catching, for heading. Every skill or every movement pattern that you can do is stored as a motor program in your long-term memory. The long-term memory has an infinite capacity. No one has ever filled their long-term memory. So as far as we know, it's got an infinite capacity. It stores information indefinitely, i.e. once you've stored something in there, it's there forever. You can learn to ride a bike, i.e. you will learn the motor program for riding a bike. You might not get on a bike for 10, 15 years, but you will then be able to get back on the bike and ride it. So you've stored that motor program, it's still going to be there. What does it do? As we've said with a two-way arrow, it sends requested information back to the short-term memory. Okay, so they're the key things about the memory boxes. That is what they do. That is how they interact with each other. There's one last thing we just need to quickly cover. So here's a bit of a random question. What is learning, or when have you learnt something? Now, it sometimes comes up as like a little one marker. What is learning, when have you learnt something? Well, the simple fact of the matter is this. Learning is when, draw a couple of arrows down here, information is stored in the long-term memory. If it isn't in the long-term memory, it hasn't been learnt. Okay? When information, be it a motor program, be it someone's telephone number, be it someone's name, unless it's stored in the long-term memory, it has not been learnt. Okay? So they're the key things. Now, sometimes the question is, how can you increase learning, or how can you maximise learning with a sports performer? There's three key strategies that we can use. So coaches in sport will often make use of these three strategies to maximise learning: chaining, chunking, and mental rehearsal. And it's fairly straightforward. What is chaining? What we do is we create links. A chain is made of links. We link movements together. Okay, so it allows us to remember things in the correct order. I'm just going to run out of space, unfortunately. Ah, well, you know what I mean. Okay, so there's the key things there. Chunking is, exactly what it says. You chunk items of information together. Classic one is when you're trying to remember someone's telephone number. You don't remember it as 0, 7, 8, 1. You do 078 146, and you chunk information together into bite-sized pieces of information. You know, I think the classic phrase there is you give people bite-sized pieces of information. Instead of just lots and lots of information. Okay? And then finally, obviously mental rehearsal. This process stimulates body and brain to remember the information, particularly motor programs. If you are picturing how to do a technique perfectly, your brain's thinking about it, your brain's almost sending impulses to the muscles, so you're almost getting a feel for it. So again, that's a very good strategy for increasing learning. Okay, hope you found this video useful, folks. Like I said, everything to do with memory. As you've learned there, it's about repetition. It's about getting things to store in the long-term memory. So in case of you need to remember this for the exam, it's going to be a case of watching this a few times, having a go at some tasks, get the repetition going there, and make sure it sticks in the LTM. Best of luck with it all.